Hey everybody, we're back with another video, this time talking about figs, and in particular, factors that affect cold hardiness with figs, and how our own trees fared this winter so far. We're in North Carolina, zone 8A, and we saw a minimum temperature of 10.1 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is also out here in full sun and full wind exposure. We get a lot of wind in this location, so any cold temperatures we do receive are amplified, and any tender growth that did still exist going into the colder temperatures, it was definitely more prone to being desiccated with the strength of these winds that we get. But I want to give you guys a little look, kind of point out which varieties did better for us, and some subtle differences, because we did have some grafted figs, and I noticed something pretty interesting, and I don't know how significant it is, but I'll leave it up to your guys' interpretation. You can see here though, I mean, pardon the mess, the rows are looking a bit disheveled right now. We have a lot of holes that are empty and going to be replanted, and irrigation lines just lying everywhere. But I started pruning some of these figs. These first 1, 2, 3 were Atriano. Very good variety, very vigorous. It's actually fairly hardy in my experience too. However, because it's so vigorous, and it kind of reminds me of like citramellos and other stuff in the citrus world, where because it's so vigorous, I mean this really thick stuff at the base will be lignified and ready to take the cold, but you'll have a lot of smaller shoots that just aren't hardened off enough, and they did end up perishing in the cold. So I was able to distinguish and cut back till we saw green, and actually these did have more growth on them, but I also took some cuttings to propagate some new trees. So figure they were about twice as much as you see here. We probably lost somewhere about around 30-35% of the trees to cold damage. Another one, now this is one I want to make an interesting observation about. This is actually Smith. So this was quite a larger tree. This was Smith grafted onto Atriano here, and you could see this is the graft union, and I grafted it onto a massive cutting of Atriano because they can get really big. That was off of maybe, that might have been 1.5 or 2 years old, the tree that it came off of. But I figured, what the heck, let me try grafting it, and it worked. So having a cutting that big, it had so much stored energy. It shot off like a rocket, which was perfect for putting a variety like this on, because I wanted to get a bit more material of Smith, and I wanted to have a little bit bigger tree. I noticed it did grow better than Smith on its own roots, and I think it also took the cold a little bit better, because this is after 1 year, and this shoot got really, really thick by comparison. So keep in mind, we probably have over a foot, maybe 1.5 feet of growth that didn't die back in the cold. And now I'll take you to the other Smith, which is here. This was on its own roots, and then that is also Smith on its own roots there. So you can see these are looking more like 8 inches and maybe 12 inches. So they're somewhere between say 30 to 50% smaller, in that ballpark. Whatever the case is, though, you can see these plants are not only smaller in diameter, but again, they're shorter. They did die back more substantially. On top of that, the fruit that we were getting off of the Smith grafted was better and ripening earlier, and I don't know if that's because of the increased vigor. I don't know if we were just getting fruit set sooner and the fruits were ripening in warmer weather, and so on, but the tree was a lot healthier, and it actually showed less signs of stress, less fig mosaic virus, things like that. So I know it doesn't work for every climate, especially if you're growing in ground, but for us, Smith is just one example of how some of these varieties can do better on a really vigorous rootstock. And I have found that some rootstocks like Little Miss Figgy and Violet de Bordeaux can root very easy and grow very large, but Atriano just has something about it where it's not only super vigorous, but it gets really thick. Everything grafted onto it too seems to really thicken up, and that thickness definitely helped more of this survive, which is kind of contrary to how you'd be thinking if you're planting things for cold hardiness. And again, there is a margin where this doesn't even matter. You just want to plant it on its own roots, because no matter what you put it on, it's going to die back all the way. But this was an experiment to see how much would survive. We still have more of the winter to go, of course, but after seeing our 10-degree low, this is what we're left with. So very interesting to see that difference. A big variable too, and you'll notice, I mean, I've only cut a few so far, but a big variable with hardiness and figs, and I know Ross, the fig boss, has covered things like that, and some other YouTubers have given mention of this. Lignification is very important when it comes to the hardiness of figs. I mean, it really goes for all sorts of fruit trees, citrus included. You do want your branches to be fully lignified and ideally thicker and have a little bit more bark to them. So you can see some of these shoots miraculously are still alive. I believe this is JH Adriatic, which did hold up better than some of our other Adriatics like Strawberry Verte. I think I've noticed less damage on JH Adriatic, which is interesting. But you can see these parts as we go lower, all this older growth is more lignified, but this top stuff that was still growing up to the top, this was still growing when the cold came around. It's dead. It's completely gone. So it does absolutely make a difference, and a lot of the hardiness comes from these branches thickening up and hardening off. If they're still green when the cold comes around, they're probably not going to make it. There's actually a couple trees here, funny enough, that are completely cut back. I believe this was Tiger Panache, and that was Italian 258. It wasn't a super healthy and tall one, though. It went through a lot of stress, but Tiger Panache seemed very not hardy. And I did notice there was like a class of figs, basically, that didn't make it as well out here, and a lot of them seem to be more exotic and sought-after types, like Tiger Panache, Col de Dom Blanc, Black Madeira, Figo Preto, Italian 258. I'm sure a lot of them will come back from the roots just fine, but for a lot of them are such late ripeners too, where I don't know if it's even worth growing them if this is going to be a yearly occurrence. I mean, we have had and we will have warmer winters than this, but when the colder ones come around, I mean, next year we're pretty much guaranteed not to get fruit set off of Tiger Panache. I mean, we might get lucky, but this first year those fruits did not ripen. One that surprised me though, De La Senora. This one was actually hardier than I expected. It held up really well and it got a lot of thickness. This one grew really well, and it still managed to ripen its fruits in a reasonable amount of time, and the fruit quality was pretty good. I actually liked it better than a lot of our Adriatic types, and it looked similar. Ripens around the same time, maybe a touch later. On both of them, though, there's still plenty of unripened figs from these first-year trees. But as you can see, we even have some skinnier branches still hanging on, and I did take some cuttings. This was even bigger. So this one I'd almost rank similarly to Atriano in terms of hardiness, where you could push this in a colder zone, but if you have a short growing season, you probably won't ripen the fruit. But going past here, now we can talk about some of the ones that did a little better. First, we have Verdolino, which was a very popular, very hard to acquire and expensive variety. Verdolino has impressed me with its hardiness. I'm looking to see how the fruit quality improves in the coming years, but in terms of a fast-growing, fast-lignifying tree, Verdolino did really, really well. I mean, it did have some branches that kept growing till the ends that got zapped a little bit at the ends, and you could see even on some of these, like that cracking there. I mean, the top of that's toast, but a lot of this actually lignified really well, even though it's skinnier. But you will see these have some really hefty trunks and size on them after 1 year, and these were also grafted onto Atriano. So there you can see the Adriana rootstock and where I originally grafted on the Verdolino, because I was trying to get multiple trees off of limited material. And that's, I wonder if you guys can see that. There's another thing I've noticed on these trees grafted on Adriano. I don't know if it has to do with their vigor, but I'll see this like massive swelling around a lot of the node regions. I'm not sure exactly what that is or if that's any cause for concern, but that's something I see the whole way down basically. It's more prominent on these thicker parts, but you can see these developed a massive trunk. This looks absolutely hardy, and I just took cuttings off of this one recently, and it looked great all the way up almost till the tip. Just the top 1 or 2 inches that wasn't usable. So Verdolino did really well. Most of them I have grafted onto Adriano, or White Adriatic was another rootstock I used, which also seems to be fairly hardy here, though less productive. I'm not sure which is which. I know these two are on Adriano. This is a possible White Adriatic graft, but I'm not entirely sure. Either way though, it seems to have fared well, and you can see that more tender stuff, even though it appears to be a hardier variety, we've still got some dieback because these were just really skinny green shoots. But even then, there is a difference. Lignification, and I noticed this with citrus too, lignification doesn't seem to be the only factor in cold hardiness, because some of these were equally lignified or not, and some of them lived and some of them didn't. Some had even thicker branches that were more lignified than that skinny little thing, and yet they completely died back. Like in the case of Tiger Panache, the whole plant died to the ground, and yet this only had a little bit of damage on that relatively tender shoot there. So there is a difference. Obviously, there's a lot of factors that influence cold hardiness at a genetic and structural and chemical level. A lot of stuff that I don't even quite understand, but it's important to note at least that lignification is fairly universal, and then from there we can note these individual varieties that are performing better. But yeah, Verdolino did really, really well. It was right up there with some of our hardiest, and I'm glad I have several trees of it, really. And I forget, this one doesn't look like Verdolino. I think this is our Strawberry Verte, and that tag is wiped. But you know what? It does. I can almost barely make that out. But yeah, it says strawberry faded on it. So this was a Strawberry Verte, and you know what? Some of them actually held up pretty well, so I might take back what I said about it being less hardy than JH Adriatic. But some of the Strawberry Vertes I did notice. Well, actually, I should distinguish here. We had a mishap here where some of these figs were supposed to be a different variety. Yeah, they were supposed to be Petite Negra, and then the fruit I got looked exactly like an Adriatic fig. It looked almost spot on with Strawberry Verte. However, these trees, these Petite Negra trees that gave Strawberry Verte fruit, have died back very far. I don't know if you could see that, but these main branches, they're dead already. All that wrinkling, all that discoloring, it goes down. So the trees are in a lot worse shape, and they're also much more poorly lignified than the JH Adriatic or Strawberry Verte. So I don't know what variety that was, but it's not a great one. So that's a shame, but we're probably just going to pull those up, pot them up, and replace them with something better. Langue de Houx, I have several trees here, and a lot of these holes you see are all going to be replaced with Langue de Houx. It was hands down our favorite variety in terms of flavor, and in terms of hardiness, it also seems superior. I'd put it right up there with Chicago Hardy and Verdolino and all those. Very, very minimal damage, great lignification, and on their own roots, they thickened up very nicely, despite not growing into the tallest trees either. First-year trees, though, so they're bound to grow more, but for their size, I mean, they did really well. If anything, that might have contributed to their hardiness if they didn't grow too vigorously, but Langue de Houx I was very impressed with this year, so I'm glad to see it so hardy. Let's see. I think those are some more of the not petite negras. What was another interesting one here? Yeah, this one died back quite a lot, which is unfortunate. This was from the same batch of the not petite negra, the same place we got all these cuttings from. This was, let's see, it was the not white Genoa. Yeah, you could see we just had a lot of knots, but this was something de oro, like golden drop. I forget the exact name, but this variety didn't seem particularly hardy. It died back quite a lot. I know it's going to resprout, but I was hoping to have a larger plant because I actually really like the fruit on that one. They did ripen kind of on time, but most of them didn't ripen, so I don't know if that one's going to be on the chopping block. Maybe I'll just keep one tree, but I was impressed with the flavor, not so much the production and the late ripening. But we have a row, not exclusively of Chicago Hardy, but I know we have some here. We could follow this down and go in because we do have our Little Miss Figgy and Improved Celeste in there. But Chicago Hardy, I mean, it's understandable why this one is just like a staple in terms of cold hardy figs. It did really well across the board. Even a lot of the tips are still looking okay. So a quality I noticed about it, which it is in line with the lignification idea. A lot of the Chicago Hardies stopped growing well in advance to any frosts, which is something I was taking note of on a lot of these. Vertolino, Chicago Hardy, Long de Oot were all varieties that stopped growing in advance to the cold. Some of the Adriatic types, Violet de Bordeaux, let's see, not Improved Celeste. Well, Atriano was another that kept growing. Some of those that kept growing, they did get zapped at least a little bit by the cold. But Chicago Hardy, really, really good. Practically no damage anywhere except for little tiny shoots here and there. But the thicker stuff is doing great. These Improved Celeste, I think I took a look at these the other day, and they mostly looked okay. See, I kind of forget. I know we had quite a few of these. These were doing some funny branch angles, and I think that's kind of manifesting now in the winter time, because I don't know if this is something you guys have experienced, but a lot of these figs, and again, I don't know if it's the branch angles, but they've been splitting in the winter here where the branch meets the trunk. So I don't know if that's going to be an issue in the future, if it's going to heal, but just something to know for these trees that we're keeping a lot of the trunk on. Some of them do have that damage. I am noticing some wrinkling up here, so this particular one may have lost a bit more, but some of these that kind of have that like open hand shape there, there's a couple more here. These appear to have taken less damage, and they did also lignify and stop growing really early on. They still have maybe a little bit at the tip, not crazy, but fairly hardy. You know, not overly impressed with it. Some did still grow a few shoots, but pretty good overall. Pretty good. There's obviously a whole range of spectrum when it comes to the cold hardiness here. This is another good strawberry verte where it's only got minimal damage at the top. We're going to go through and trim all these. I'm also trimming them too to maintain the space because, as you can see by our intensive planting here, I mean just whole rows of tightly packed fig trees. I need to manage the space effectively and keep these trees smaller, so I will be pruning them probably twice a year. Once now and then once again maybe midsummer, summer solstice time. I'll do a combination of pruning and pinching to encourage fruit set, but also to keep these trees a little bit smaller. It's kind of hard to say that with figs, but you know, we'll try. Violet de Bordeaux, these things are ridiculously tall. I think with me standing up next to it, they are my height or a few inches taller. So some of these are easily, yeah, like this one is huge. That one's pushing 6.5 feet tall, at least. So really, really big trees, some of these. Very impressed with them because most of them were just on their own roots too. So they did really well, but this was one of those ones that kept growing into the winter. So although there's a lot of thick material, that did make it just fine. And even some thinner stuff that I was surprised with. Pretty much every branch on Violet de Bordeaux has some sort of cold damage, at least at the very tip. We're noticing like some blistering almost on that one. But yeah, pretty much all of these have some sort of cold damage, but as a whole, they managed really well. And I actually quite like the taste of these too, so I have no problem keeping this many. Very productive. Definitely later ripeners. I hope this year's a little bit better, but we still got a lot of figs off of them. I just don't know. I mean, it's definitely just one of those ones where I thought we had a fairly long season, but it could just be because we're dealing with first-year trees. This year will be the real test for a lot of these, and if some of them still ripen too late, I may just swap out most of them with a more productive variety, because a lot of these figs do just go to our local farmers market. We eat some, we share some, make some jam. We made lots of jam this year, and then we sell at our local farmers market. So while we do get a good spread with the early ripeners like Improved Celeste, Verdolino, and then the late ripeners like the Adriatics and Violet de Bordeaux, I don't want anything that ripens too late and we barely get any figs off of it. I do want some good yield off of these. We do have another Verdolino at this end here. This one was planted a little bit later, so it does have some fresher growth, and it does have some dieback here. You can see some of these branches coming back to these thicker parts, but that's okay. I'm not too worried about it. We got plenty of Verdolino that's doing just fine. And more Chicago Hardies here. Can't get enough of our Chicago Hardies. I think I removed some of the others that were here that weren't, but yeah, these all look just as good. Last couple here. I think this is, I got rid of our O'Rourke trees, our LSU O'Rourke trees. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but you guys might know what I'm saying. They were right next to here. I had maybe 2 of them, and they grew probably just as vigorously as this tree you're seeing here. LSU O'Rourke is enormously vigorous, but the fruit kind of sucked, and I know it's just the first year, but here's the thing, for me at least, this may be different for you, but if I have varieties here that produce great fruit off of first-year trees, I want to capitalize on those versus waiting on trees that have mediocre at best fruit quality in their first year. I know it could get better and even good in years to come, but some of these were just astounding for first-year trees, and that just gives me extra assurance, knowing that if I have to replace trees or if I plant out new ones, whatever the case is, I'm getting good figs the first year, and every year afterwards it should improve even more. So for me, I just didn't feel, a couple of the LSU figs didn't make the cut. LSU O'Rourke and LSU Purple, actually. I also found that one to be pretty mediocre. Unfortunately, the tree grew great. All the trees grew great. What was another? Let's see, Purple. Well, LSU, it's not officially LSU, but Improved Celeste. I will say the flavor's not amazing. It's pretty good if you get a really ripe one. If it's really soft and sweet and sugary, definitely acceptable. Just not as good as a lot of other figs, in my opinion. That's the only thing. But Improved Celeste was definitely the best of the ones that I got to try this year off of a first-year tree. And the size of the fruit, they were beautiful fruit and a good size too. So I can't hate on Improved Celeste, and a lot of the trees actually grew really nicely too. So I kept that one, got rid of some of the others. But anyways, this tree just got me thinking about those because of how it looked. This was another Strawberry Verte, and I think this big branch is probably died back. I see a lot of wrinkles on it, which isn't a good sign. This ripened a few fruit though. This was one of our patio trees actually that was just shaded out, and I brought it out here and I just stuck it in the field. I mean, it grew to a really nice caliper in 1 year. A lot of these trees did really, but it got really tall because it was shaded out. So it grew really tall, but it wasn't very productive. It was very late. But Strawberry Verte was still very good overall. I think, I mean, honestly, the fruit are kind of comparable to JH Adriatic, but that one might have been a little bit better. De La Senora, though, was better than both, which was pretty funny. We do have next to it Battaglia Green, which I think was also pretty similar. I may not have the most refined fig palate. I know citrus is more my thing when it comes to distinguishing flavors, but even then, I'm not quite sure I can pick out all the nuances, and some of these Adriatic types just tasted like Adriatic types. You know, they all had that figgy strawberry flavor to them. They're all quite good, and sweeter than I expected. But yeah, this tree seems to hold up pretty similarly in hardiness. Some of those long tender shoots not doing so hot. But I think that mostly covers what we have out here. We are going to clean this up over the next few weeks and really get things trimmed up for the coming year. But we learned a lot in terms of how these trees hold up in, well, unprotected and fairly harsh conditions for our climate. Again, I've mentioned this with the citrus, but we're in a pretty poor microclimate in terms of all the wind and sun that these trees experience, as well as our unpredictable falls and springs, and plants can wake up and come out of dormancy and then get zapped, or they can just not go into dormancy well enough and then get zapped. There's a lot of things that can happen here despite it being a warmer zone overall. So very interesting to take note of all these things. But as you can see, I mean, this year was still, I would say, a massive success. You know, we learned some things about these varieties, about our planting method, all that stuff. But I'm really happy. It was really fun walking out here and just having like a fig forest, just like almost 100 trees to walk through and pick fruit from. And I can't wait to see it regrown again and not just look like a bunch of sticks. But yeah, fingers crossed for some of these varieties. I had to cut back all the way. And I'm happy we came out with a few surprises too. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, I know a lot of you aren't exactly here for my fig content, and I am by no means an authority in the fig world. But hopefully you found this a little bit informative, a little bit interesting. Let me know how your figs did, or how any of your fruit trees did, really. But let me know if you agree with some of the points we brought up about the lignification and even the different hardiness between varieties despite lignification. I find that all to be pretty interesting, kind of drawing those differences. But I like that we came out with some really reliable winners, and I like that our grafted trees actually lived. Considering this was a colder than it has been in recent years winter, these grafted trees did great. They didn't die back. You know, maybe that could work for you in a warmer zone if you want to take advantage of some of the good qualities. Because again, the Atriano rootstock example here worked out pretty well. That additional thickness really helped. And again, the fruit quality and fruit ripening and everything, the health of the tree was better on this rootstock. And I've noticed that for more than just Smith. Other varieties like Black Madeira, and even just varieties that are more infected with fig mosaic virus, or maybe your particular cutting was more stressed, grafting them onto a really vigorous, healthy variety like this one just seems to breathe life into them. The fruit are better, the tree looks better. I mean, it's pretty universal when it comes to fruit trees, but a good rootstock can really make the difference. People just tend to be scared of it because growing figs outdoors especially, a lot of people who are growing them are actually in the Northeast in much colder zones where, yeah, you probably don't want to graft it. You basically have to bury the graft, and then you're risking the rootstock also coming up when it regrows in the spring, and differentiating between things, it would be kind of annoying. But I guess you could do it, but really in these warmer zones is where we can get away with something like this. But if you're growing in pots even, you could definitely pull off a grafted fig. But then I don't know if you'd want something so vigorous, because that can be kind of a pain in the butt when it's outgrowing your pots, because Atriano is one of those ones that really did that for me. But anyways, guys, that's enough for me. I'll hear from you guys in the comments. I hope you enjoyed as always. Like, subscribe, do all those fun YouTube things, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye bye for now.